I want to talk a little bit today about the Latter-day Saints, again specifically focusing in on their Book of Mormon. This will be part two of a two-part presentation, two-part video. The first one is elsewhere, you can look that up. This is just the second part. The first one looked more specifically at geography. This one takes a broader perspective. Now, when we're talking about holy books, you can get holy books from that are rooted in a number of different foundations, if we look at it that way. In some cases, you get a human being will go and they'll think for a while, they'll reflect, they'll meditate, they'll philosophize, they have some ideas, they write them down, you get a holy book and a religion that comes from that. Now, the Book of Mormon and the Bible both contain human insight, there's no question about that, but that's not the foundation. We can move on to some other holy books that are founded in divine revelation, so God tells people about himself, gives them instructions on how to live and so forth. Again, Book of Mormon and Bible would both include divine revelation, but that's not actually the root of both of them. In both cases, with the Book of Mormon and with the Bible, the foundation is acts of God, things he did in human history, how people responded, the interaction between the two and so forth. That's the real crux of the Book of Mormon and the Bible. Now that raises a point, though, that the status of either the Book of Mormon or the Bible as a Word of God is intimately connected to the question, is it true to history? If God did not actually do what the book claims, then we are not actually learning anything about God, and therefore it's not actually the Word of God. So those two questions, is this book truly the Word of God, and is this book accurate to history, are intimately connected. So let's compare them now, because as I say, the Book of Mormon and the Bible are similar in that regard. So let's kind of put them side by side and see how they stack up. The Bible, especially the New Testament, well, explicitly the New Testament, is written in Hellenic Greek, which at the time was kind of like English is today. It's almost a universal language. A lot of other writers also used Hellenic Greek. We've got numerous examples of it. Now, the Old Testament was written primarily in Hebrew, and that was not nearly the universal language that Hellenic Greek is in, and yet we have other examples of writings that are in the same language. Now, the Book of Mormon was written allegedly in Reformed Egyptian. Other examples of that language, well, are non-existent. We don't have any other examples. To my knowledge, I've never heard a Mormon apologist say, oh look, here's another book written in Reformed Egyptian. So we don't have any. So that's the first point of comparison. The next point of comparison is, if we've got a series of events which happened in human history, then do other historians talk about those same events, those same people, those same places, and same time frames? When it comes to the Bible, we have a number of ancient historians that talk about the same period of history and the same people as what's described in the Bible. And we find a great deal of overlap. In fact, Flavius Josephus in particular, we get a great deal of information that fills in the picture for the New Testament that the Bible it doesn't fill in as many details as in some cases. With respect to the Book of Mormon, other historians that describe the same events and times and places, well, again, to the best of my knowledge, I've never heard a Mormon anywhere say, oh, look at such and such a historian talks about the same stuff. I mean, granted, there's lots of ancient records of, wars and famines and kings and so forth, but that's all very generic. Is there anything that specifically describes the specific kings, the specific wars? And that I haven't seen. I'm going to look at another one now, in terms of how the book got to us, and more specifically the manuscripts that we have at our disposal. So manuscript can be anything from antiquity that could be maybe a couple of lines to, for instance, with the New Testament, it can be just a few verses, or it can be the entire New Testament. In many cases, you'll find that it'll be a collection of books, maybe all the Gospels together, or maybe a single book. Now, a lot of these will be, like I said, it'll be a couple of sentences, or it'll be most of a book, the back page got ripped off, or, there's a large part of it, but part of it got burned in some fire somewhere, whatever. Anyway, in whole or in part, we have many, many thousands, tens of thousands of manuscripts in various languages. As I said, Greek was the original language. It was written in lots of other languages as well that it got translated into. The other interesting thing, though, is quotations from others. The New Testament, it has been said, if we were to lose every New Testament that we've got on the face of the planet, it could be reconstructed in its entirety explicitly from quotations that the early church made of the New Testament. So it was such an influential book that not only did they talk about it in the early church, they specifically quoted it. And by the sounds of it, from what I hear from scholars in the field, they quoted the entirety of it, front to back, which is pretty remarkable. There would obviously be other quotations as well. The early church would quite obviously be the biggest source of quotations. Now, in terms of the Book of Mormon, the ancient manuscripts that we have from ancient languages in the original Reformed Egyptian, well, we don't even have one. We have 0. Now, that's going to raise a question. How did Joseph Smith translate it? Well, he had, according to his testimony, he had a manuscript copy of the Book of Mormon written on gold plates that he used to translate it from Reformed Egyptian into English. You will not find that anywhere, that manuscript anywhere in any museum in the world. What happened to it, I leave that for your research. It's an interesting story, but I'll leave that for you to find out. The point, though, is we do not have any today, now, anywhere that can be referenced. What about other languages? Not one, anywhere. Quotations from others, though. Surely, if the book was as influential as the New Testament, maybe we're going to get lucky here, and we can rewrite the entire Book of Mormon from quotations from others. I've never heard Mormon anywhere say, oh look, such and such another ancient writer quotes the Book of Mormon word for word. Now this raises a question not so much about specifically the content of the Book of Mormon or Bible, see how much the content is true to history. This raises more a question of the book itself. How did we get the book from antiquity to us? And what you see with the Bible is what you would expect from any influential book. People did two things. They made copies to spread it around, and they quoted it. They talk about it. They write other books about it. The manuscripts that we have of the New Testament are spread out over North Africa. They're spread out across Europe, Middle East as well, and we have copious examples of them everywhere. And the quotations as well. I mean, that's a very common thing. You see that today. When a person writes a book, another person writes another book in response to it, and they quote the book. Bloggers are infamous for their quoting and tearing apart something. That's just human nature. That's the way human nature works. The fact that there's not a single manuscript of the Book of Mormon in its original language, not a single manuscript in any other language, and not a single quotation from anybody else, well, that's suspicious. That's suspicious. Furthermore, there's another very interesting factor about the manuscript that Joseph Smith allegedly had with the gold plates. Because if we're to trust what we've got from him, and if we trust what we have in the Book of Mormon in its English translations, it was complete. It was intact. Nothing was missing. That, again, is unusual. If you look at the other manuscripts we have from other languages in the New Testament, they're not complete. A lot of them are missing pieces and so on and so forth. So the odds that Joseph Smith gets the one and only manuscript and there's nothing missing is a little suspicious. Now, he did claim that they're on gold plates, and gold's a pretty good form of maintaining a record. It doesn't rust, it doesn't corrode, but it does wear. I mean, I have a gold wedding band, and after a little over a decade of marriage here, I can tell you gold wears. And if we look at other gold artifacts, well, they don't always handle time very well. Time is not necessarily their friend. This particular artifact is broken, it's in multiple pieces, and more specifically, pieces are missing, and you can't always tell exactly what you're looking at. And yet, in the Book of Mormon, allegedly, it came to him complete, and it was legible and ready to go. Again, does that disprove the Book of Mormon? No, it does not. It just raises fairly suspicious red flags. So if we're going to take one last look here at geography. Now, as I said, I looked at this more specifically in another video. You can look at that one. I'm just going to cover it briefly here. Basically, if you grab a Bible map and you see on there that there are countries marked out, there are provinces marked out, there are cities and towns that are marked out on there, you can be fairly certain that pretty much everything that's marked out is known, not assumed. Now, there are bits and pieces that are missing. Even though for some cities like Jerusalem we have it down to street level detail as I described in the other video, there are pieces that are missing, but it really comes down to, does this town coincide with this ancient ruin over here or that ancient ruin over there? So it's not even a question of was this town between this ocean and that lake somewhere? No, we have exactly specific ruins that we can compare. Say, is it this one or is it that one? We can examine the evidence either way. Great deal of certainty there. Book of Mormon, when it comes to their maps, well, frankly, it's just they're not too sure. Did the events happen in North America and Central America and South America across the entire Western Hemisphere? Just Central America? Did it happen just around the Great Lakes? There's other options even that get brought up by some very sincere, devout Mormons. So frankly, the big picture is completely up for grabs geographically. Like I said, look at my other video to dive into that in a little more detail. To summarize, Book of Mormon, written in an unknown ancient language, is no independently documented history. No other historian says, oh yeah, those events happened like it's described. We don't have any manuscripts from antiquity that we can look at in a museum somewhere. Geography, well, it's a great deal of uncertainty with respect to the geography in terms of where exactly all these events took place. The Bible, a very different story, written in a common ancient language. We've got lots of other historians that will fill in details and confirm the broad picture that the Bible paints. Manuscripts, you can go to museums and you can look at the manuscripts yourself. You can see them with your own eyes. You can't touch them, fair enough, but they're there. They're physical evidence from antiquity that you can look at. And geography, as I said, in some cases is accurate, right down to street level details. What does this mean now, again, in terms of comparing the Book of Mormon to the Bible? Well, as I said at the very beginning, the Word of God's status is intimately tied to the true to history status. And with the Bible, you can see that there's a great deal of evidence, many, many reasons why we can trust it. With the Book of Mormon, in some cases, as with the geography, for instance, it's pretty much a devastating case that can be made against the Book of Mormon and its historical reliability. In other cases, like the manuscript, it's just raising a lot of red flags. It's very suspicious. So if I got to put my money somewhere, I'm putting it behind the Bible.